Good morning from Copenhagen. Wonderful to be here. So as an activist for the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, I am sometimes asked whether I am an optimist or a pessimist with regards to achieving the SDGs and sustainable development. Well, my answer is this: I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist. I am determined because I believe we have no choice. There is no alternative than striving to achieve those goals that the world leaders adopted back in 2015, that we have now been working to implement for the last 5 years. There is no alternative than to try and strive for that better future for the world. This is not to say that there's not a reason to be pessimist. There is certainly reasons to be pessimist. We have right now a global pandemic that is challenging our societies all around the world. A health crisis that is leaving millions of more people in poverty, that are challenging our health systems, that are increasing unemployment. And as you can see in this cartoon, after the pandemic, we are looking into a global recession. But behind that, we all know that climate change is the long-term challenge that we must also deal with in this situation that we're in. And even before COVID, we were not on track to achieving the SDGs. We were not on track with sustainable development. We were not on track with the Paris Agreement. And we know that with the pandemic, we will see a setback on all 17 SDGs. And this has led to some, like the guy here in my first slide, to suggest that maybe we should wait a little bit with the climate action. Maybe now we have more urgent issues that we need to deal with. Maybe we should adjust the SDGs and maybe lower the ambition a little bit. Well, to me, this is the completely wrong approach to a challenge. We know that we've learned this from the past. So John F. Kennedy didn't abandon his Man on the Moon project because it was difficult. In fact, he said, and I quote, "We choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it is hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win." So when we set ambitious goals, we do it not because it's easy, but because it is hard. We do it to push ourselves, to push each other, to stay focused. And in this situation, we must stay determined. Now more than ever, we need common goals, and we need that roadmap that the SDGs represent that can lead us in the right direction. And luckily, we also have reasons for optimism. Because in this pandemic, we have also seen political action in a pace that we have rarely seen before. We have been able to mobilize political compromises across party lines. We've been able to mobilize public investments and also behavioral change in a pace that before would have seemed unimaginable. And with the combined will of politicians, of scientists, and the innovation power of the private sector, we now have not just one, but several vaccines being prepared to roll out in early 2021. So we can do this, folks. We are human beings, and we got ourselves into this mess. We can also get us out. But not by going back to how things were before, but only by mobilizing our joint capabilities, our resources and willpower towards our common goals, the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. And another reason to be optimistic is that we know that the resources are available. We know that we can close that annual $2.5 trillion US financing gap for the SDGs. It's a lot of money, but we know that according to the IMF and others, it will require around 2% of global GDP to finance the SDGs, and with around 0.4% in development aid to fill the gaps in lower income countries. And this is, of course, one aspect where technology, and particularly FinTech, can play a very important role. This slide illustrates how the SDGs are related, and also the role of technology. I've borrowed it from Professor Catherine Richardson at Copenhagen University. And this bit shows us the relation between sort of the main human well-being targets of the SDGs, SDG 1 to 6, which are sort of the classical development goals, which are the main issues and the main challenges facing the global south primarily, while the sort of the green SDGs, 13, 14, and 15, relating to the environmental challenges, are the main challenges for the global north, because we represent a lifestyle and a consumption and production pattern which has a very high impact on our environment and climate. These are the main issues that we are facing and that we have to deal with. And you can say the relation here is basically inequality. As I said, we know the resources that are there to close these gaps. The unequal distribution of wealth and resources means that we face these different challenges, and our instrument here is reducing inequalities. Then we have the levers for this transformation. Then how do we go about dealing with this inequality? Well, here you can see science and technology, and also the economic and financial sector play an incredibly important role as tools, as levers, in order to face the challenges regarding human well-being and regarding the environmental goals. And especially, of course, I want to move on to how FinTech particularly can play a role here. And a very good place to find inspiration is the UN Digital Financing Task Force, which has looked at how particularly digitalization within the financial sector can help us achieve the SDGs. And the main point here is that we need to move to a more citizen-centric financial system, which to a much higher extent is able to empower citizens to channel their own financial resources in the direction that they want, towards their wishes for our common future, which is very much represented in the SDGs. So we can see the citizen as a taxpayer, a buyer, a saver, a borrower, and lender. The citizen represents a lot of ways to actually channel resources towards the SDGs. This is also from the UN Task Force, and it shows us that there is a lot of potential here for mobilizing resources, for closing that financing gap of the SDGs. If we put our new technologies, FinTech, if we digitalize our financial sector and our economy, we can really mobilize a lot of resources towards closing these gaps. And again, it is looking at the citizen-centered approach and seeing how we can empower them by using the domestic savings to finance development, by supporting small and medium-sized businesses through the digitalization of public financing and increasing transparency. Fighting corruption is another thing. If we embed the SDGs into the decision-making processes and the capital markets, this will release vast amounts of resources that we can then channel towards the SDGs. So obviously there are also some risks related to this digitalization process, and this is where we also need politicians to get on board. And of course, we also need to look at the regulation and the regulative barriers, but also the levers. And this is why we need to have this cross-sectoral dialogue between the private sector and the innovation that is happening there, between citizens and their needs and wishes, and the policymakers that are responsible for removing the barriers and for adopting the programs that need to we need to move forward with this technology. This is obviously also investments into the infrastructure, into skills and training to be able to have everyone on board and living up to one of the basic principles of the SDGs of leaving no one behind. This is a critical political responsibility. And this is also one of the reasons why I have founded 2030 Beyond, which is a do tank for the SDGs. We have the knowledge, we have the technologies. Now we need to start acting, and we need politicians to come on board in this journey. We have launched the initiative Parliamentarians for the Global Goals, where we work with parliamentarians all over the world to support them and to connect them and convene them in order to share best practices and ideas on how we can best forward and accelerate action around the SDGs. And one obvious issue here is making sure that we have the framework in place to move forward with using these levels of technology and digitalization to mobilize resources and to close the gaps within the SDGs. So I started out with a cartoon. I'll finish with one. You can say, while we are struggling to fight off COVID, it's worth a thought whether, in fact, the planet is, this is also a way of the planet of fighting off Homo sapiens, which you can see here. But as I said, I'm neither a pessimist nor an optimist. I'm determined to hold on to the ambition of the 2030 agenda to transform our world for people, for planet, and for prosperity. This is the decade of action, and we need to start delivering on the SDGs together. Thank you very much.